Before the night of May 28th, 2026 fully unfolds, there is something you need to understand. This is not ordinary energy passing quietly through the sky. Most people are going to move through today completely unaware that something massive is shifting underneath their emotions. They will wake up feeling emotionally exhausted, confused about why conversations suddenly feel distant, why someone they deeply care about seems cold or unreachable, why their chest feels heavy without explanation. They will blame stress, bad timing, hormones, or exhaustion. But you are here because some deeper part of you already senses that this day carries a different weight. And you are right, because at 11 o'clock at night, Venus and Saturn collide in one of the most spiritually confronting moments of the entire year. A cosmic turning point designed to rip away emotional illusions and force people to confront the truth they have been avoiding about love attachment and emotional dependency. This is not a soft awakening. This is the kind of moment that changes how you see relationships forever. If your emotional world has felt foggy lately, if you have struggled to tell the difference between genuine love and desperate hope, there is a reason for that. And the universe has been carefully building toward this revelation for days without you even realizing it. Nothing about today appeared suddenly. Every emotional crack, every uncomfortable feeling, every strange tension you have experienced recently has been preparing you for this exact collision. Go back 5 days ago to May 22nd, when Venus squared Neptune. That was the beginning of the illusion. Neptune does not operate through facts. Neptune operates through longing. It creates emotional fantasies so convincing that you stop seeing people for who they truly are. Instead, you begin falling in love with potential, with imagined futures, with the version of someone you desperately hope they could become. Under that square, many people convince themselves that love alone could heal emotional distance, repair broken behavior, or transform unavailable people into safe partners. Maybe you ignored red flags because your heart wanted the fantasy more than the truth. Maybe you kept giving emotionally because you believed patience and devotion would eventually change the outcome. That is how Neptune works. It does not directly lie to you. It simply wraps reality in emotional fog until your desire becomes stronger than your clarity. And for the past 5 days, many people have been living inside that fog, confusing emotional craving with authentic connection. Then came the next wave. Just 2 days later, Mars squared Pluto, and suddenly all the emotional pressure hidden beneath the surface began erupting. Suppressed anger surfaced. Control issues exploded into the open. Conversations that once seemed manageable became emotionally unbearable. Relationships that had been holding together by a thread started shaking under the weight of unresolved tension. You may have felt it as restlessness, emotional irritation, or the strange sensation that something was about to collapse even if nothing obvious had happened yet. That feeling was real, because everything leading up to today has been building pressure beneath the surface of your emotional life. The illusion created by Neptune, the intensity triggered by Mars and Pluto, all of it was preparation for the moment Saturn finally enters the story. And Saturn does not negotiate with fantasy. Saturn only deals with reality. That is why today feels heavier than the days before it. This is not simply emotional discomfort. This is a cosmic intervention. Venus is currently moving through Cancer, the sign connected to emotional safety, nurturing, intimacy, and the deep human desire to feel protected by love. Venus in Cancer wants closeness. It wants emotional reassurance. It wants to believe that love means never having to emotionally survive alone. It seeks comfort in attachment and connection, believing that emotional bonds can shield people from pain. But Saturn is sitting in Aries, and Saturn in Aries carries an entirely different lesson. Saturn in Aries teaches emotional independence. It demands self-responsibility. It strips away the illusion that another person can rescue you from your inner emptiness. Its message is cold, direct, and unavoidable. No one is coming to save you from yourself. You must become emotionally strong enough to hold your own heart without depending on another person to constantly validate your worth. And what intensifies this energy even further is the ancient astrological reality of today, S². Saturn occupies the superior position over Venus, meaning Saturn is not compromising with Venusian desires. It is overpowering them. It is forcing emotional truth to rise above emotional comfort. Every place where you have confused attachment for love, every place where fear of loneliness has kept you trapped in emotionally unhealthy patterns, every place where you have abandoned yourself in order to maintain connection, Saturn is about to expose it with brutal clarity. And that realization may hurt more than you expect. Because the hardest truth is not discovering that someone else cannot give you what you need. The hardest truth is realizing how long you have ignored your own emotional reality just to preserve the fantasy of being loved. And what unfolds next may completely change the way you understand relationships from this moment forward. This is not the universe trying to hurt you. It only feels painful because the illusion has become so familiar that part of you mistakes it for safety. What Saturn is doing today is not punishment, it is release. It is the moment the emotional chains finally become visible enough for you to stop calling them love. And by the time this night comes to an end, something inside you is going to understand a truth your soul has been trying to reach for your entire life. The revelations arriving today may feel sharp at first, but they are also the doorway out of confusion. Saturn is bringing three undeniable truths about love to the surface, and the first one may challenge everything modern romance taught you to believe. Real love is not instant gratification. It is not emotional fireworks that erase loneliness overnight. It is not the cinematic fantasy where chemistry alone magically heals trauma, fixes incompatibility, and guarantees permanence. Real love is structure. It is something built deliberately, slowly, carefully, through consistency and endurance. And structure is never created in a moment. It is created over time. That is why today may feel frustrating in deeply personal ways. Someone you thought was emotionally available may suddenly seem unreachable. A partner who once felt warm may become distant, consumed by responsibilities, stress, or emotional exhaustion. If you are single, you may feel as though every possible connection slips away before it has the chance to become real. What hurts most is not simply the distance itself, it is the timing. Just as your heart finally feels brave enough to open, they pull away. The moment you begin imagining a future, they ask for room to breathe. You offer affection and vulnerability, and instead of being embraced, your emotions seem to disappear into silence. This is how Saturn operates. Saturn slows things down. It creates heaviness. It introduces separation where you expected closeness. And for many people, this energy awakens the oldest fear hidden inside the heart, the fear that maybe they are fundamentally unworthy of lasting love. Today may trigger thoughts you rarely admit out loud. What if nobody ever fully chooses me? What if I always end up abandoned? What if I am destined to watch love leave every time I begin trusting it? But Saturn is not exposing these fears to destroy you. Saturn is exposing them so you can finally stop letting them control your decisions. Because the delays Saturn creates are not punishments, they are filters. They reveal whether a connection can survive reality instead of surviving only fantasy. The lesson is not to love harder, chase harder, or sacrifice yourself more deeply in order to hold someone close. The lesson is patience. The lesson is recognizing that if a relationship collapses the moment distance, stress, or discomfort appears, then it was never stable enough to carry your future in the first place. Saturn understands something Venus often resists accepting. Attraction changes. Excitement fades. Emotional highs eventually settle. The butterflies people worship at the beginning of relationships cannot sustain love forever. And when all of that temporary intensity disappears, something much more important is revealed. What remains after the excitement fades? Is there loyalty? Is there emotional maturity? Is there mutual effort? Is there shared vision? Is there stability strong enough to survive difficult seasons? Or was the entire relationship built on emotional fantasy from the beginning? Today, Saturn forces that question into the open. What may feel like rejection is actually revelation. Saturn is showing you whether the love you invested your heart into has roots deep enough to survive reality. If the connection is genuine, the pressure will strengthen it instead of destroying it. The delays and emotional heaviness of today will eventually become proof that the relationship was capable of surviving beyond temporary passion. But if the connection breaks under this pressure, Saturn has done something sacred for you. It has protected your future before you sacrificed even more years trying to save something that was never truly capable of lasting. That realization alone can completely change the direction of your life. Because one of the deepest emotional addictions people carry is the addiction to chaos disguised as intimacy. Many people confuse emotional unpredictability with passion. They mistake anxiety for chemistry. They become attached to instability because intensity makes them feel alive. Saturn is ending that illusion today. It is teaching you to value consistency over emotional drama, to appreciate the person who remains steady when life becomes inconvenient, to recognize that real devotion is often quiet, repetitive, and sometimes even ordinary. And that brings us to the second truth. Saturn is preparing to reveal. The fantasy version of love cannot survive this transit. Earlier, when Venus squared Neptune on May 22nd, the emotional fog became thick enough for people to project impossible dreams onto the people they desired. That square encouraged people to fall in love with possibility instead of reality. But now, the consequences of that illusion arrive. Today, Saturn demands emotional honesty. And emotional honesty requires the destruction of fantasy. Not symbolically, literally. The imaginary version of this relationship that exists only inside your mind cannot continue surviving beside the truth anymore. Venus in Cancer naturally clings to emotional attachment. It wants safety so badly that it sometimes holds on to people long after reality has proven they cannot provide genuine emotional security. Under Neptune's influence, this attachment becomes even more dangerous because it no longer connects to who someone truly is. It connects to potential, to imagined transformation, to future promises that never fully arrive. Many people are not actually in love with the person standing in front of them. They are in love with the story they created about what that person could someday become. They fall in love with imagined healing, imagined maturity, imagined commitment. And today, Saturn tears through that illusion without mercy. Some people will finally realize that the emotionally unavailable person they spent months or years trying to rescue has no intention of changing. Others will recognize that repeated promises were never evidence of growth. They were simply cycles, repeating themselves in different forms. The person who kept saying things would improve may still be the exact same person they have always been. And the hardest part is that deep down, you may have known this already. You may have sensed it quietly in moments when your intuition whispered the truth, but you ignored it because accepting reality felt more painful than continuing the fantasy. Today, that escape disappears. Saturn removes every emotional excuse protecting the illusion, and once you finally see the relationship clearly, you will never be able to return to the version of the story that once comforted you. And for some people, the revelation arriving today cuts even deeper than discovering someone else cannot love them properly. For some, Saturn is about to expose something far more uncomfortable, the possibility that they have been emotionally hiding from themselves the entire time. Maybe you were never truly available either. Maybe you disguised your emotional walls behind the identity of being the caretaker, the healer, the endlessly understanding partner who keeps giving without asking for much in return. Maybe becoming needed felt emotionally safer than allowing yourself to be fully seen, because being needed gives you control. Being admired for your sacrifices protects you from vulnerability. It allows you to stay busy rescuing everyone else, so you never have to confront your own emptiness, your own fear, your own unresolved wounds. Saturn has no interest in allowing those patterns to remain hidden anymore. Today, it pulls your attachment style into the light and forces you to recognize how much of your romantic behavior was shaped long before these relationships even began. The emotional patterns formed in childhood, the ones that taught you love must be earned, chased, or constantly protected, are rising to the surface now. Saturn reveals why you continue choosing people who recreate emotional dynamics that already wounded you years ago. Familiarity feels safe even when that familiarity carries pain. That is one of the hardest truths human beings ever face. People often repeat emotional suffering not because they enjoy it, but because it feels recognizable. And today, Saturn confronts you with every place where you settled for emotional scraps while convincing yourself it was enough to survive on. It reveals the moments where you tolerated neglect, because at least someone still acknowledged your existence. It exposes the times you accepted inconsistency, disrespect, emotional distance, or half-hearted effort simply because receiving partial love felt less terrifying than facing loneliness. And when that realization lands, it may feel like an emotional collapse inside your chest, because Saturn removes every comforting filter. It strips away future fantasies, hopeful excuses, and romantic projections, until all that remains is the relationship exactly as it exists in the present moment. No imagined future, no idealized version of who they could become, just reality standing naked in front of you. And reality can hurt, especially when you realize how much energy you invested protecting illusions that were quietly draining your spirit the entire time. But this is where the breakthrough begins, because the destruction of fantasy is not the end of love. It is the beginning of real intimacy. You cannot build authentic connection with a version of someone that only exists inside your imagination. You cannot genuinely love a person you have never fully allowed yourself to see clearly. As long as you remain emotionally attached to the fantasy version of them, you stay disconnected from the truth of who they actually are. And if that person is incapable of meeting you emotionally, then your attachment to the illusion also blocks you from becoming available for the kind of love that could truly nourish your life. Saturn arrives today to end the cycle of trying to rescue emotionally unavailable people. It ends the exhausting pattern of attempting to heal childhood wounds through romantic relationships. It forces you to stop choosing distant people and then blaming yourself for their inability to offer the emotional depth you desperately crave. Instead, Saturn introduces boundaries, real boundaries, not performative ones, not temporary ones you abandon the moment you fear losing someone. These are boundaries rooted in self-respect, the kind that quietly but firmly declare that you will no longer remain where your worth is constantly questioned. The kind that refuse to excuse behavior that repeatedly damages your emotional well-being. The kind that finally recognize red flags as warnings instead of challenges to overcome. And the moment you stop negotiating your value in exchange for temporary affection, something profound changes inside you. Because when the illusion finally shatters and you choose truth instead, you create space for authentic love to enter your life for the first time. That leads directly into the deepest lesson Saturn in Aries is trying to teach through this transit. And this may be the hardest truth of all, because at first it sounds almost contradictory. Venus in Cancer believes emotional safety comes through complete emotional merging. It longs for fusion, for closeness so intense that two people become emotionally inseparable. It dreams of relationships where hearts move together so completely that individuality disappears into connection. But Saturn, in Aries, challenges that entire belief system. Saturn says that losing yourself inside another person is not safety. It is imprisonment disguised as romance. Most people misunderstand healthy love because they secretly believe relationships exist to complete them. They search for another person to fill emotional voids they never learned how to face alone. But genuine intimacy was never meant to function that way. Healthy relationships are not built from two broken halves desperately clinging to each other for survival. They are built from two emotionally grounded individuals choosing connection without abandoning themselves in the process. And today, Saturn reveals every place where relationships became your escape from yourself. Every place where you depended on another person to confirm your worth, your attractiveness, your importance, your lovability. It reveals how deeply fear of abandonment has shaped your behavior. Maybe it made you become overly accommodating. Maybe it taught you to silence your own needs so others would not leave. Maybe it convinced you to shrink your personality, dim your light, sacrifice your dreams, or betray your boundaries simply to preserve emotional attachment. Saturn looks directly at those patterns today and says that the cycle ends here. Some people may experience this lesson through physical separation. Someone may walk away. You may realize you need to leave. Circumstances may suddenly force distance into the relationship, but for others the experience will happen internally. A quiet realization may emerge that you have spent so much time chasing external love that you completely forgot how to nurture yourself. And once the distractions disappear, once the validation fades, once you are left standing alone with your own reflection, Saturn asks the most important question of this entire transit. Who are you when nobody else is there to define you? That is the initiation hidden inside today's energy. Because real freedom is not measured by relationship status. Real freedom is emotional stability that exists regardless of whether someone chooses you or leaves you. The moment you no longer require another person to complete your identity is the exact moment you become capable of experiencing genuine intimacy. Because authentic love is not emotional fusion, it is not dependency disguised as devotion. Real intimacy is two complete individuals consciously choosing each other every day, not because they are afraid to be alone, but because their connection genuinely enriches the lives they have already learned how to carry on their own. Saturn in Aries is not asking for perfection from you. It is asking for sovereignty. It is demanding that you become emotionally grounded enough to stop placing the responsibility for your happiness into someone else's hands. This transit is teaching you how to stand firmly inside your own identity, how to develop a sense of self-worth so stable that rejection no longer feels like destruction. Instead, rejection becomes direction. It becomes clarity. It becomes the universe revealing where your energy no longer belongs. That is the real lesson unfolding through today's collision. Emotional independence does not mean becoming cold or detached. Saturn is not trying to harden your heart. It is trying to strengthen your foundation. There is a difference. The goal is not to stop loving deeply. The goal is to stop abandoning yourself in order to receive love from others. And once you reach that place internally, once you can stand fully on your own while still remaining emotionally open, compassionate, and vulnerable without losing your center, something profound happens. You stop chasing love out of fear. You stop begging for reassurance. You stop collapsing every time someone cannot meet your emotional needs. That is the moment true freedom begins. And now you can finally understand why the emotional confusion of the past week has felt so overwhelming. Earlier I told you there was a specific reason. Relationships have felt unusually unclear lately. And this is the answer. For days, you have been moving through Neptune's emotional fog. Venus square. Neptune on May 22nd blurred the line between intuition and fantasy. It amplified longing. It intensified emotional projection. It made people feel things so strongly that they mistook emotional intensity for truth. Then Mars square. Pluto arrived 2 days later and turned that emotional confusion into pressure. Everything suddenly felt urgent, emotionally charged, impossible to ignore. Your nervous system has likely been carrying more tension than you consciously realized. Your emotions may have felt inconsistent, chaotic, difficult to trust. One moment full of hope, the next full of fear. Your mind searching endlessly for certainty, while your heart struggled to separate reality from imagination. But tonight, at 11 o'clock, something shifts. The fog finally begins dissolving. And the truth waiting underneath that fog may surprise you. It may expose things you are not emotionally prepared to admit. It may reveal that someone was never truly capable of loving you the way you hoped. Or it may reveal that a relationship you feared was collapsing is actually becoming more authentic because the false layers are finally falling away. Either way, clarity is arriving. And the reason this truth feels so emotionally intense is because your soul is ready for it now. Even if your conscious mind resisted seeing it before, some deeper part of you has been preparing for this moment for weeks. The confusion was never random. It was the transition between illusion and reality overlapping inside your emotional world. A crossfade between fantasy and truth. And tonight, that transition completes. This is why Saturn transits feel so brutal while they are happening. They force endings before the freedom becomes visible. They strip away illusions before the relief arrives. But what people rarely talk about is the peace that follows afterward. When you wake up on May 29th, something inside you may feel noticeably lighter. Like emotional weight you had been unconsciously carrying for months suddenly disappeared overnight. You may realize that the person you fought so desperately to hold on to was never actually what you wanted. What you truly wanted was the emotional security you imagined they could provide. The fantasy of safety, the idea of being chosen. Or perhaps you will realize the opposite, that the relationship you feared was breaking apart was only losing the unhealthy dynamics that could never survive long-term anyway. And what remains underneath all the emotional debris is something surprisingly stable, something honest enough to endure reality instead of fantasy. In either case, today changes you. Saturn's revelations are not meant to emotionally destroy you. They are meant to reconstruct you into someone wiser, clearer, and no longer trapped inside repeating cycles of emotional confusion and disappointment. This is not the ending your fear has been whispering about. This is the beginning of something far more real than what existed before. And if you feel the pressure of this energy building right now, there is something important you need to remember. Do not resist the process. Do not force emotional conversations simply because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. Do not demand immediate reassurance just to temporarily calm your anxiety. Saturn does not reward emotional impulsiveness. It rewards patience, observation, and emotional maturity. Give situations room to reveal themselves naturally. Allow reality to unfold instead of trying to control it through fear. If feelings of sadness, rejection, loneliness, or unworthiness surface today, do not run from them immediately. Sit with them honestly. Those emotions are not permanent truths about your value. They are the echoes of old survival patterns finally dissolving. And on the other side of that emotional release is a version of you who no longer requires constant external validation to feel lovable. If you feel called toward self-care or ritual today, honor that instinct gently. Light a candle if it comforts your spirit. Write down your feelings instead of suppressing them. Spend time nourishing your body and calming your nervous system. Take a bath. Rest. Breathe slowly, because emotionally, spiritually, energetically, you are moving through an initiation. And initiations require tenderness toward yourself, not judgment. The universe is not attacking your heart today. It is removing the illusions that kept your heart imprisoned. And once you stop fighting the lesson, once you stop trying to hold together what was never stable to begin with, something extraordinary becomes possible. You become available for a kind of love that does not require self-betrayal. A love that does not force you to shrink your identity in order to keep it. A love that does not depend on endless sacrifice, emotional chasing, or fixing broken people in order to feel secure. Instead, it becomes something steady, mutual, grounded, and real. The kind of connection capable of surviving beyond fantasy because it is built on truth from the beginning. And deep down, whether you realized it consciously or not, that is the love your soul has truly been searching for all along. If you made it all the way through this message, thank you for sharing this moment with me. If this resonated with your experience and you want to continue exploring these deeper cosmic shifts together, consider subscribing and becoming part of this journey. Your support truly means more than you know. And if today's energy revealed something powerful inside you, feel free to share your thoughts or experiences below. Until next time, take care of your heart. Trust the process unfolding around you and stay connected for more insight into the energies shaping your path forward.